Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It is our match preview. I'm joined by Alex James from Lancs Live. He covers Burnley. It's an interesting game this weekend, Alex. One that Newcastle, I would say, have to win and win more than just collect 3 points. Do it in with a bit dominance and a bit style. And for Burnley, I mean, they've lost their first 2 games of this season. Things don't look particularly rosy. Looking from the outside in, is it a must-win for Burnley even this early on?
Do you know what it probably is? It's certainly a must-not-lose. I think with the international break coming up as well after this one, to go into that 3 defeats from 3 would be a really bad start to the season and leave Burnley playing catch-up before we started, really. So I'm not sure it's a must-win with any kind of style or dominance. I think it's just go there and get a result. Ideally 3 points, but at least 1.
Can I just say you sound a little bit like Sean Dyche there for a moment? I was taking a double take there.
Maybe I've been spending too much time with him.
And what's it like then at the moment? Because obviously towards the end of last season, there was kind of rumblings of maybe, I don't know if discontent is the right word, but things weren't particularly happening that maybe Dyche wanted to happen in terms of contracts. And I don't know what it's been like after the season finished, but you know, he's a legend down at Burnley, but are things starting to fall away a little bit?
Yeah, I'm not sure if things are starting to fall away necessarily from the playing side of things. I think what sort of got Dyche's back up last season was the contract situation, which involved Jeff Hendrick, who I'm sure we'll come on to in a bit, Joe Hart and Aaron Lennon. All 3 of those were allowed to leave because essentially Burnley didn't get their act together and get those deals sorted in the early part of the season. And then that sort of snowballed into Dyche making a few comments, which I think he was right to make, and there were only sort of factual statements that business hadn't been concluded earlier. They've got a host of first-team players out of contract next summer, so they're in danger of the same thing happening again. They haven't been able to strengthen as much as they'd like. They've only really brought Dale Stephens in terms of strengthening the first 11 from Brighton. They've got a lengthy injury list at the moment, sort of 5-6 players out, which doesn't help when you're Burnley and you operate with sort of 20, 22 senior players. So they do need new faces. There's talk of a takeover in the background as well. So whether that's having a bit of an impact on money being made available and what can be spent over the next 48 hours or so. So all in all, it's a depleted looking Burnley, but it was also a depleted looking Burnley for the last 9 games of last season, and they lost the first one to City and the last one to Brighton, and in between put a really good run together and sort of were in with a chance of the Europa League for large parts of that.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because they finished the season so strongly after the lockdown was kind of lifted for football. So what's gone wrong at the start of this season? I know we're only a couple of games in, but why hasn't that form been able to be carried through?
Yeah, injuries have played a big part. If you were sort of picking the first choice 11, they're probably 3 or 4 short of what you would say is their first choice 11, particularly at centre back. And that's been the real issue. James Tarkowski and Ben Mee haven't featured yet in the league, so they've had to play Kevin Long, who's a capable deputy and has been over the years at Burnley. But Jimmy Dunn has come in as well, who hadn't played a senior game above League One in this country, and was sort of chucked in against Leicester and Southampton. So that hasn't helped, because that sort of base that Mee and Tarkowski give them, I mean, they're one of the sort of best centre-back pairings in the league, really, and that base hasn't been there. So that's been one sort of shortfall. And the other one is the squad depth, which is a combination of lack of signings and injuries, means that during the game, there's not much Dyche can do off the bench. He's sort of looking, and he's got a couple of fullbacks and 5 kids, really. So there's just precious few options available to him to try and change something in game.
So in terms of how the season started, is Dyche under pressure to, I don't want to say turn it around because it is so early on, but I just see the comparison to Newcastle. I mean, Newcastle could head in this international break 7 points out of 12, so if they beat Burnley, and in the quarter-final of the League Cup. And Steve Bruce, he isn't under pressure, but there's a lot of criticism on social media from fans, and there's questions over style of play and what have you. So it's not as easy as it looks maybe on paper when you look at them statistics. Whereas is Dyche in a bit of a different position? Yes, it's not started well, but he's not under threat. His job's not under threat, and the fans are still behind him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dyche could probably play himself at centre back, and the fans would still support the move. He's worked wonders at Burnley. He's coming up to 8 years. He's got 2 promotions to the Premier League under his belt. We're sort of established. I mean, he wouldn't say that, but you would have to say Burnley are kind of established as a top 5 club at the moment. They've been in Europe, so his position's not under any threat whatsoever in terms of him being sacked. But having said that, he won't want to be sitting for 2 weeks between Saturday and West Bromwich. They play after the international break, looking at a squad that might be a bit thin on the ground with a couple of injuries and no points on the board.
So we'll talk about the game then. I mean, it's not a game that strikes excitement into most, and Sky have decided to let the whole nation suffer a bit by putting it on, TV. I remember that last game at St James's Park, and it was one of the worst games I've seen in recent times. And there's been quite a few of them, but that one was up there. And then I think Burnley won the corresponding fixture 1-0, which again wasn't one to write home about. What do you see happening this weekend, this Saturday? Is it? I mean, they're going to cancel each other out, aren't they?
Yeah, I wouldn't be expecting a 4-3. I think Burnley last time they came to St James's, that was by far one of the sort of more stagnant performances from them. Really, I don't really remember them creating too many clear-cut chances in that game.
I don't think they had a shot on target. I've just checked the stats, and I don't think they had one.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But they were solid, and Newcastle weren't able to break them down. So I think Burnley's starting point will be that again, to make sure that they're compact, they're in their shape, they're tough to beat, and then try and exploit from set pieces, perhaps try and exploit on the counter and get Dwight McNeil into a bit of space. But yeah, it is going to be a close, even contest. I can't see anything other than that.
So let's talk about Jeff Hendrick, who obviously left Burnley to join Newcastle this summer. A very capable Premier League player, experienced, without really grabbing much of the headlines. And he came to Newcastle making clear that he wanted to be a central midfielder. That's, I think that was part of maybe the reason as well. He maybe left Burnley because he wasn't being utilised maybe in the position he wanted. And then all of a sudden he's found himself on the flank at Newcastle and doing a decent enough job. He scored against West Ham. He set up the goal as well for Callum Wilson. How big of a loss to Burnley was he?
I mean, it was a loss because he would be playing on the right of midfield for Burnley this week if he was still here. But he was never going to sort of be one of that starting midfield too. He's probably similar to what he's like at Newcastle, actually. Sean Dyche has got Ashley Westwood and Jack Cork as his favoured pairing. Josh Brown will come in January and has done really well since, and did really well last season as well. So in that sense, it's probably a little bit similar. He's probably swapped one for the other, and he finds himself in exactly the same boat in that he's workmanlike. He'll give us all. He's versatile, and he'll slot in on the right where needed. And yes, he wants to play in the middle, but he's got obstacles in his way, and at the moment he hasn't been able to shift them. And it seems like that's been the case at Newcastle as well. I know did he play in the middle at Spurs, but then got moved out again anyway.
He did, yeah. So you got moved out on the right. I can't maybe half an hour ago. I mean, obviously he was at Burnley for a long time, and I don't know how long that is dilemma the right word for him, where he's out on the right and he wants to be in the centre, went on for. But how did he handle that? I mean, can you give a bit of insight to our listeners about his kind of attitude and application? I mean, one would assume, it's spot on after hearing what people have said about him. But obviously he's not going to be happy to play out on that right, for a long time going forward.
You wouldn't think so. I mean, he did play in the middle for Burnley. He has played in the middle for Burnley, and sort of earlier on in his Burnley career, where there was a little bit of experimentation in terms of 4-5-1. He was playing just off the striker, which might be his best position, but he didn't get much of a run there. And Burnley are pretty rigid in 4-4-2 as well. It's very rare they don't play two up front. So he's found himself on the right. He's not a natural winger. He's he's not blessed with great pace. He's probably never going to beat a man, but for Burnley particularly, he was able to do that job of protecting the fullback, working really hard and retaining possession, and he chipped in with the odd goal as well. Attitude-wise, I've never heard anything bad said against him. I think you probably need to look at his Instagram, I think, and he was in the gym and doing all sorts of weights and keeping himself in superb condition over the summer, where he was unsure as to what was coming next for him. And you don't hear he doesn't do a great deal of media interviews, but you don't hear anything about him in terms of sort of complaining or whinging or getting his back up about being out of position. So from that point of view, I think he will sort of settle in and play where he's needed. But having moved to try and avoid that, he probably will be knocking on Steve Bruce's door and saying, what can I do to convince you I play in the middle, whether that's Newcastle changing formation a little bit or him icing one of those regular starters.
Yeah, it'd be certainly interesting to know what he was promised when he was having the talks, because of course there were other clubs after him, namely AC Milan, but he has got John Joe Shelby, Isaac Hayden, Longstaff brothers, all, well, at least three of them are probably ahead of him in the queue to play in that middle. So it'd be certainly interesting to see what he was promised when he was having talks, whether he was promised a role in the middle, because like we said, at the moment he is on the flank. You mentioned there he doesn't really do much media. I don't know if you read the quotes from Steve Bruce about the unveiling kind of, and that he wanted all the signings lined up. I think it was for the Sky Sports, when they're walking to the camera thing, and he didn't really want to do it. And that kind of shows, in a day and age where social media is really important and all that, cameras in your face, and he just wanted to get back on the training pitch, back in the gym. And I think that's a really good sign of a really good professional in this modern day football world.
Yeah, I think I remember doing a piece probably 18 months ago with one of his coaches at his boys club back in Ireland, and he was with Robbie Brady. So him and Robbie Brady are big pals, and it was sort of evident from that he always just wanted to play football, and he's got a lot of pride in sort of I don't know if making it's quite the right word, but coming over to England and becoming an established Premier League player, and the pride that gives him, and that he's able to sort of take back home with him as well. So he's a nice lad. He's done a couple of interviews with us, but I wouldn't say he's a natural in front of the cameras in terms of media. But as you say, he just wants to get his head down and get on and play football.
Let's go back to Burnley then. If you were sitting down with Steve Bruce and you were saying this is what you need to look out for, this is Burnley's main strength, what would it be?
I think, Dwight McNeil is the obvious answer, because he's the one player Burnley have who can sort of produce a moment of magic, something out of nothing, and find themselves that bit of guile and creativity. But Chris Wood as well, who for the last he's probably pretty underappreciated as a Premier League striker. He scored double figures in the last 3 Premier League seasons, which is no mean feat, especially in a Burnley side who are sort of mid to lower table for a couple of those seasons. He leads the line really well. He can sort of hold the ball up. He can cause problems in behind, and he's brilliant at sort of dealing with set pieces and those Dwight McNeil crosses, which Burnley have a lot of success with. So I think from Newcastle's point of view, switching on at set pieces will be key, because Burnley do make the most of any opportunity to put the ball into the box and find the likes of Wood and potentially Ashley Barnes if he's fit as well.
So it might be music to your ears then to hear that Steve Bruce has said Jamal Lascelles, who's Newcastle's captain, is a doubt. Emil Kraft, who was a full-back, he's been playing centre-back in the Cups. He's also a doubt. They were without Kieran Clark. So
right.
that leaves Federico Fernandez, a really good defender, to partner with Fabian Schär, who only came back from injury in the Cup competition. So he's not going to be fully fit. Or Isaac Hayden moving into centre-back, which could play into Jeff Hendrick's hands, but it wouldn't be ideal up against someone of Chris Wood's ability. So
yeah, it's similar to Burnley that, and at the back, because they've just welcomed Tarkowski back in a similar way to what you were saying about Shah. He only played his first minutes against City in the Cup in midweek, so he's going to come back in, I would imagine, and partner Kevin Long, who doesn't play every week, although he's at the moment. So it's similar in the sense that both sides look stretched defensively. So maybe 4-3 is on the cards.
Well, what's their biggest weakness then? Like, what can Newcastle look to exploit?
I mean, I think from Steve Bruce's point of view, he'll know exactly what he's going to get with Burnley, which is a sort of tactical shape. Without the ball, they're very good. They're narrow. They're hard to break down. What they don't allow is sort of crosses into the box and short sort of build-up play. But they are prepared to stand off on the edge of the box and allow someone like John Joe Shelvey to try his luck from 25 yards. That's something that Burnley have sort of fallen short on a little bit, and it's why Tarkowski and Ben Mee are always top of the clearances in the blocks, because they're prepared to let people get their shots off from range, banking on the fact that they're 25 yards out, the chances are less likely to go in, we'll get in the way, and if we miss it, Nick Pope will produce a saving goal. So that's an area that I've noticed, particularly over the last sort of 6-12 months, where they've allowed teams to have shots from sort of 20 to 30 yards, and that can catch Burnley out when you've got someone like a Shelvey, who, as we saw in midweek, has got the quality to plant a couple in the top corner.
So you mentioned there Nick Pope in the England squad again, but he's not really been given a run of games, only one start in the last couple of years. With the Euros next year, is he putting pressure on himself, do you think, to kind of impress Gareth Southgate, and will that be at the forefront of his mind going forward in Premier League games, which I guess in turn can make him a bit more vulnerable to making a mistake?
He just hasn't been given a run in terms of first choice 11 for England. But to be honest, I don't know what more he can do. He's been sort of consistently excellent for Burnley. Had 15 clean sheets last season in the Premier League. Only missed out on the Golden Glove on the last day. There's this sort of perception that he can't kick, or sort of play, or not can't kick, but can't sort of play football out in the way that perhaps Gareth Southgate wants to and can do with Jordan Pickford. But having watched a fair few England games, he's more than capable of getting the ball and passing it 15 yards to his centre half or to his fullback when England enjoy so much possession. So I don't think he'll be worrying in the slightest about England heading into this weekend. And I do think he'll probably get a start in one of these 3 games that are coming up. So it will be a big opportunity for him, really, to show that he can be long-term number one heading to the Euros next summer.
So we've also mentioned Chris Wood there, and I guess this might be the answer to the next question, or like you say, Dwight McNeil as well is another name we've mentioned. But who is the star player for Burnley that Newcastle really do need to keep quiet?
Yeah, I mean, Wood is probably the man most likely in terms of goals. You won't be surprised to hear that Burnley have got injury concerns up front as well. Jay Rodriguez, he finished last season really well. He's out with an ankle problem, and Ashley Barnes is on his way back, played for the first time in midweek. So it'll be a toss-up between him and Massey Vidra as to who starts alongside Wood. So Wood's probably the main goal threat. In terms of sort of star men, the main 3 at Burnley have been Pope, James Tarkowski and Dwight McNeil. Those are the 3 you look at it and think these are the crown jewels of this squad. If you keep them together and build a squad around those over the next 2 or 3 years, then you're looking at a solid Premier League setup. Tarkowski's obviously just coming back to full fitness, so Pope provides that level of security. He's assured, and he comes for everything set piece wise. He's brilliant at dealing with crosses. He comes for everything and he catches most things. And Dwight McNeil, who perhaps hasn't found his feet so far this season, albeit we're only 2 games in. As I said before, he's the man most likely to sort of unlock a defence, really. So it'll be a challenge for Newcastle on that right-hand side with McNeil and, well, Newcastle's right, Burnley's left, with McNeil and Charlie Taylor, who gets forward well. The 2 of them link up really well as well. So I think that's where Burnley will be looking to exploit is the fullback area and getting in behind and getting those crosses in for the likes of Wood and Barnes.
Just a couple of questions then to finish off on Newcastle. What are you most looking forward to seeing in terms of Newcastle? Is there a player that you're looking forward to watching on Saturday?
I'm looking forward to seeing how Jeff Hendrick fares, but I feel like we've probably covered him enough already. But it will be interesting to see where he plays and just sort of how he copes with that sort of tussle with Burnley, because if they do end up playing one of their central midfielders out wide as well, it'll be a relatively even matchup there. So who gets the best in that area of the pitch could be key. Other than that, I've always liked Callum Wilson. I think he's a really good signing. It'll be a good test for him up against Tarkowski as well. And I think previously when Burnley have played Bournemouth, they've always had a good record against Bournemouth. And I know Newcastle have got half a Bournemouth team now, haven't they? So we'll be hoping that from a Burnley point of view that can continue. But Wilson's sort of one of those players who I've always thought has got a good all-round package. He can lead a line. He's got a little bit of pace. He's got an eye for goal, and he can stretch defences. So it'll be interesting to see how Burnley cope with him, particularly given that their back line is a little bit vulnerable in terms of injuries at the minute.
And is this a game which Burnley fans and even Burnley themselves look upon as one they should be winning, given, they finished really strongly last season? They are now an established Premier League club. How do they look upon Newcastle as opponents?
Yeah, I think away from home, I think Burnley will always go there with the setup of being solid and in trying to ensure that they don't get beat. But as you said, there's probably a cluster of teams, of which Burnley and Newcastle are two of them, who are going to be vying for the same sort of positions and are going to be trying to be that team that Sheffield United and to a certain extent Burnley were last season, and ending best of the rest behind perhaps the top 8. So from that perspective, it is a game that Burnley have to look at and think, this is one where we can get 3 points. I think the difference perhaps this time is because they've lost their first 2, the need to not lose it might outweigh the need to go out there and win it, just to try and ensure that they don't enter that international break with 3 defeats from 3. And I suppose it depends on whether Newcastle view a point at home to Burnley as a result to take and put in their pocket, and sort of, I guess, would have a solid opening to the season now, as to whether they also might fancy a draw, meaning that I fancy a draw as well.
It's an interesting one. I think, Steve Bruce talked about criticism today in his press conference, and you can hear a bit of that in the audio version of this preview. It's interesting because, like I say, as we mentioned before, on paper, it looks like they've had a great start this season, but visually, it's not been brilliant. And it's interesting to see how Steve Bruce is dealing with the kind of criticism, and it's not going to be easy against Burnley to change the way they're playing, because Burnley are so rigid and they're very, they're strong, and they're kind of straight to the point in the way that they maybe deal with, pressure on the pitch, in terms of clearing the ball and what have you. So it's going to be interesting to see if Steve Bruce can start to change the way he plays and maybe win a few fans over. I don't think it's going to start with Burnley on Saturday. You mentioned there Burnley's way of thinking is a point more important than a win kind of thing. Your score prediction, is it going to be a point? Is it going to be 3 points or no points, hopefully, from Newcastle's point of view?
I think I'll go 1-1 and perhaps sit on the fence there. I did wonder whether playing without a crowd might be helping Newcastle in some ways, because I know that can have an effect. And you spoke about criticism there, and it seems like every time you sort of read anything about Steve Bruce, there's people sort of suggesting that he might not be the right man to lead the club forward a little bit. So it'd be interesting to see if they do, or they are a bit more free flowing from my point of view than maybe they were last season without a crowd in place. But I do think it's 2 pretty evenly matched teams, and I think Burnley having Tarkowski back is massive, and it might just give them that little bit of resilience that they lacked at Leicester in their last away game, and be enough to earn a share of the spoils.
Well, there we have it. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. To those watching, please remember to like and subscribe, and hopefully, from Newcastle's point of view, we're celebrating 3 points on Saturday night.